Now, a lot of this I got from Elkonin Goldberg. Well, that's not exactly right. I laid this out before that, but I found Elkonin Goldberg's writings afterwards, and he was a student of Luria's, and he was trying to account for why we had different hemispheres, roughly speaking, because it's not self-evident that we should. They're actually somewhat separate consciousnesses, and they communicate, but the communication isn't complete. It's like our brain is modularized and unified at the same time. And you can think about it like a meeting of people. Well, why do you want it modularized? Well, so if one person goes down, all of them don't. That's one reason. So it's some separation of function. Why else? Well, each little module can do its own creative thing independently of the others, and that's useful, and then there can be communication between them. And so there's utility in modularity, and there's utility in integration. And part of what we're trying to work out on the global political scene right now is how modular things should be and how integrated they should be. And the European community rushed into integration, and that's bothering people dreadfully because they feel that the advantages of modularization have been washed away. You saw that, and maybe they're right, because you saw what happened when Greece collapsed, right? And Greece is very, very corrupt, incredibly corrupt. And Germany, whatever else you might think about Germany, is not corrupt. And so the EEC tried to bring Greece and Germany together. That didn't work. There was no unity there. The modularity was actually useful. And the fact that Greece was so destabilized, and Italy, also very corrupt, and Spain, also very corrupt, was very shaky, just about brought the whole thing down. The argument is the modularity would have been better conserved. Well, who knows, right? Because modularity is useful, and so is integration. But full integration seems to be a mistake, and so does full modularity. How do you get that right? We don't know. That's why we're arguing about it. And right now there's a backlash. We're pulling away from the integration. And you can see why too, because in 2008, when the American economy collapsed, the world economy just about collapsed. That seems like a bad idea. You know, you might want some separateness so that if one system malfunctions and goes down, the whole bloody thing doesn't go into flames. And so we don't know how to manage that. It's a really, really complicated problem. So anyways, okay, so how does the brain work? Well, the left, roughly speaking, in right-handed males, and the reason that I'm concentrating on right-handed males is because they're simpler in their neurological structure. Women have a more complicated neurological structure, and left-handed people tend to have a more complicated neurological structure. So we'll just say that we'll just go with the standard model to begin with, and you can assume that the same systems are there in every person, but they're not laid out on the hemispheric structure quite as neatly, but they're still there. So it's sort of like these are tendencies. So for example, if you're so there's a tendency for the right hemisphere to specialize for what's relatively unknown, and the left hemisphere to specialize for what's relatively mastered. And you could think about it this way too. Left, right. It's something like that, okay? So large-scale, low-resolution abstractions tend to be the province of the right. High-resolution, detailed knowledge structures tend to be the province of the left. The left is linguistic. That's where the detailed structures manifest themselves in articulation. But the fundamental difference between the left and right isn't language versus non-language. The fundamental distinction is relatively explored and mastered versus relatively unexplored and not mastered. And that's both in terms of structure. The right hemisphere has a less granular structure. It's less differentiated. It's also responsible mostly for negative emotion, especially in the prefrontal part. And the reason for that is, well, how do you encounter what's absolutely unknown? Imagination and emotion, right? I told you that little experiment that you could do if you're alone in a house and you hear a strange noise at night in a room. Just turn off the lights and put your hand in the room. It's like your brain will just flash off monsters like mad. You know, you'll be nervous because what's in that room? Something to make you nervous. That's a very low resolution category, right? It's like, it's some indeterminate manifestation of the category of things that might hurt you. Very low resolution, but a very smart category. It's like, don't put your hand in there. You put your hand in there and you watch your imagination. It's like monsters. It'll generate monsters like mad. And that's what the right hemisphere is doing. It's saying, what's in there is an exemplar of the category of things that are dangerous. Here's a bunch of images of those things, and that thing in there is going to partake of that essence. And that's a very low resolution hypothesis. That's kind of what horror movies do with people. You know, they sort of lead them through that initial process. And so that's what the right hemisphere seems to me to be dominated by subcortical processes, whereas the left hemisphere is reversed. The cortex has more or less got dominion. And so the right hemisphere, well, we'll walk through this neurologically, but the right hemisphere responds rapidly to what's unknown, and that's subcortical. The hippocampus is doing an awful lot of that, noting a mismatch. And then it's using the right hemisphere to abstractly represent what the possibility space is in relationship to unexpected things. And then the right hemisphere is tracking that continually, what those unexpected things are, and coming up with models of what you haven't yet mastered. And that's kept separate from the left hemisphere, which already has functional models. And you don't want to blast the left hemisphere continually with anomalous information, because you blow out its structure and then you don't know what to do. So the right hemisphere generates new models in some sense out of nothing, and then when the time is right, taps information into the left hemisphere slowly so that it doesn't disrupt its function too much. And a lot of that seems to happen when you're dreaming, by the way. It happens at night. So, and what happens with the dreams, you think about how dreams work, is you might think of dreams as part of that process where ideas come to be. So they're low resolution to begin with, mostly imagistic, really highly emotional, and incoherent, less coherent. Why? You can't be coherent unless you know what to do. A, B, C, D, E, F. If that's working, you got coherence. But if you're dealing with something you don't know, you have to muck about with your category structures. And that's what dreams do. And you know, when you're interpreting a dream, one of the things you watch for is the dream presents this and then this. That's called metonymy, by the way, from a literary perspective. And what that implies is this is related to this in some way. Why else would they be co-activated? You know, people say, well, dreams are random. That's the stupidest theory I've ever heard. Like, white noise is random. Dreams are not random. They're hard to understand, but they're anything but random. They're more random than real life. Well, that's because what you don't understand is really random, and you're organized, and there has to be an intermediary that's sort of quasi-random between them, or you never get from one to the other. And dreams and fantasies, myths, all of that is part of that process that stretches you out beyond what you know into the absolute unknown. And so, and your hemispheres are differentially specialized for that. So, roughly speaking, right hemisphere, operation in unexplored territory. That's a really good way of thinking about it. You need a system that tells you what to do when you don't know what to do. A huge part of the subcortical structures are doing that too. Unknown, freeze, then what? Imagine, right? Freeze, emotion, imagine. Then explore, then differentiate, then master. That's the process. That's the process of learning. And what you're doing is you're transforming low resolution representations of what's frightening into high resolution representations that enable you to master it, to take the world apart and to make ingenious things out of it. So there's this very cool part of the Mesopotamian creation myth. So the major hero, whose name is Marduk, confronts the dragon of chaos, Tiamat, who's feminine, and he cuts her into pieces, and he makes the world out of her pieces. And one of his names, he had 50, 60 names, and I think those were amalgams of tribal gods. And one of the names was, he who makes ingenious things out of the conflict with Tiamat. It's absolutely perfect. That's exactly what human beings do, right? We confront that terrible predatory potential that lies outside our domain of experience, and we make ingenious things out of it. And then we talk about how we did it, and then we model how we did it. And that's the basis of our ethics and our morality. And the way that ties into, think about, one of the things we talked about was that the mythological hero was a representation not of the being that was at the top of the dominance hierarchy, but of the being that was at the top of the set of all possible dominance hierarchies. Okay, so here's a cool equation. The hero who goes out into the unknown to make contact with the dragon and to bring back the treasure is the same thing that wins the battle across sets of dominance hierarchies. And that's how the two things come together, right? It's so brilliant. It's so absolutely brilliant. And so it's the mythological hero, The mythological hero is the representation of what's, again, not at the top of one dominance hierarchy, but at the top of all of them. That's the I that's above the pyramid. Why the I? Because it pays attention. And that's what you do. Like, none of this is not fiction. It's meta-truth. It's the right way to think about it. Look, let's say you're socially anxious. Okay, so what happens when you're socially anxious? You go to a party, your heart's beating. Why? The party is a monster. Why? Because it's judging you. And it's judging you, it's putting you low down the dominance hierarchy, because that's what a negative judgment is. And that interferes with your sexual success. And that means that you're being harshly evaluated by nature itself. Right? So you are confronting the dragon of chaos when you go into the social situation. And so what do? You're like this, right? You hunch over, and that's low dominance. I'm no threat. It's like, well, that's not going to get you very far. You know, but that's a logical thing to do in the face of a tyrant. So I'm no threat. You know, you look at the king and you're dead. I'm no threat. I'm hunched over. And then what's happening internally? What are people thinking about me? What are people thinking about me? Am I looking stupid? Am I looking foolish? Geez, I'm awkward. I hate being here. Man, I'm sweating too much. It's all internalized, right? It's all self-focused. The I isn't working. What do you tell people? Don't stop thinking about yourself, because you can't. It's like, don't think of a white elephant. White elephant, white elephant, white elephant. You can't tell someone to stop thinking about something because they get caught in a loop. What you do with socially anxious people is you say, look at other people. Look at them, right? Why? Because if you look at them, you can tell what they're thinking. And then unless you're terribly socialized, and some people are. Some people have no social skills, and so the reason they can't go to a party is because they don't even know how to introduce themselves. Like, no one ever taught them how to behave. And so they're really good candidates for behavior therapy, because you walk them through the process of how you actually manifest the procedures that are associated with social acceptability. But most people aren't like that. They have the ability. So if they're really introverted and high in neuroticism, they can usually talk quite well to someone one-on-one. Why? Because they look at them. Well, if I look at you, it's another thing to do if you're ever speaking to a group of people. Never speak to the group of people. That doesn't exist. You talk to individuals, and then they reflect for you the entire group, because they're all entrained. So you look at one person, they broadcast to you what everyone's thinking, and you know how to talk to one person. So it's easy. So as soon as you focus on the person, not you, you push your attention outward, use your eye, you push your attention outward, and you start watching. Well, then all your automatic mechanisms kick in, and you stop being awkward. Because if we're talking, and I'm looking here, I don't know what you're going to do next, and I'm going to put disjunctions into they're like bad chords in the melody of our conversation. And the reason is I'm not paying attention. So that's why the I is the thing at the top of the pyramid. It's like the thing that enables you to win the set of all possible dominance hierarchies is the I. Pay attention. Pay attention. That's the critical issue. That's why the Egyptians worshipped Horus. That's why Horus was the thing that rescued Osiris from the depths. It's the capacity to pay attention. What do you pay attention to most? What your right hemisphere signals as anomalous. It attracts your attention. It's like, this isn't going quite right. I'm not looking at that. Wrong. That's what you look at. That's what you look at. What's not going right. Because that's the terrible monster that might eat you, but it's also the place you get all the information. So that's why it's useful to have discussions with your enemies, because they will tell you things you do not know. And that's such a great thing, because if you don't know them, well, you're not very smart, are you? You know, there may be a time when you go somewhere that's the thing you need to know. And maybe your enemy will tell you why you're such a fool, you know, and a bunch of other things that aren't true too. But even one thing that's accurate, it's like, yeah, thanks very much, man, maybe I'll do some work on that, and I won't have to carry that forward. So, and then that's part of the reason, again, why the terrible predator, it's always the terrible predator that has the gold. It's like, it's the person who delivers the message you do not want to hear. So it's rough, but it doesn't matter. Life is rough. Okay, so how are these specialized? the right hemisphere, operation in unexplored territory. And that unexplored territory emerges whenever what you're doing doesn't work. You know, you can conceptualize it as that which is beyond the walls of the city. But the city is a category structure, abstractly put. There's no difference between the barbarians that invade the walled city and the things that happen in the world that damage your category structure. They're the same thing from a practical perspective. Okay, right hemisphere, operation in unexplored territory, negative emotion, inhibition of behavior. That's this. That's anxiety. That's what happens when the Medusa looks at you. You turn to stone, right? That's the basilisk in Harry Potter. It freezes you. Why? You're moving forward according to a schema. If you're moving forward properly, you're getting to where you want to go and the schema is being validated simultaneously. I'm moving forward and the map is correct. Something happens that's unexpected. What should you do? Stop. What else are you going to do? You stop first. Then the predator can't see you, right? That's the freezing reaction of a prey animal. So it's built very, very deeply into you. Very, very old circuits do that. In fact, if it's a real orienting reflex to something that's anomalous, you'll go like this. And that's to stop the thing that will jump on your back from tearing out your throat. And that's really, really fast. It's almost as fast as spinal snake reflex circuitry. Extraordinarily fast. And you know, that's conserved over an evolutionary span. That predator defense system is at the bottom of your cognitive apparatus. Everything's been built on that. Like, it's a low resolution pattern. A higher resolution pattern that's the same pattern is built on top of that. Then a higher resolution pattern that's the same pattern is built on top of that, and so on. But that initial architecture is duplicated across the levels of differentiation of the nervous system. And that's partly why these symbols can be so archaic and still be accurate. It's still the way the world works. Negative emotion, inhibition of behavior, image processing. Right, because thing about images is they're fast. You know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Okay, you get the picture. You know, get the picture is actually something you say to someone if you say, do you understand? Right, to get the picture is very, very fast. So the right hemisphere manages that. Holistic thinking, that's that low resolution thinking that generalizes across instances. Pattern recognition, pattern generation, and gross motor action. Yeah, freeze and get the hell out of there. That's gross motor action. The right hemisphere is very good at that. That's why if you're right-handed, if you're right-handed, you use your left hemisphere to manage the really fine motor details, right? You write with it. You write with it. And because that's very, very... If you're right-handed, you tend to use your left hand to open the top of jars, right? You use your left hand. That's a gross motor action. I mean, sometimes people are more lateralized than that, but the left hemisphere is specialized for the fine-grained things that you know very well. That's exactly it. Okay, the left hemisphere. Well, the left hemisphere, which is associated with positive emotion, by the way, that's specialized for operation in explored territory. So now what we might say is that you spend your whole life trying not to have your right hemisphere turn on. Because why would you want that? That's where the monsters pop up. So you stay in explored territory, but maybe you also tentatively expand its borders. And the left hemisphere seems to be involved in that too. So if you're curious about something, it's usually something minor enough so that it won't blow your entire category structure if you explore it. Now sometimes you get unlucky and you're like Eve in the Garden of Eden. You go have a little chat with this little snake that seems to be of no significance whatsoever, and it feeds you something, the apple, it feeds you something, and bang, everything falls apart, right? You collapse and you're out there in history. You're no longer in your old paradise. So activation of behavior. Yeah, well that's because positive emotion is associated with movement forward. Like if you're where you want to be and things are going well, then your behavior should be activated so that you go and get things. Now, one of the negative consequences of that is that if you're really in a good mood, really happy, you're going to be impulsive and make mistakes. You know, because you hear these dough-headed, that's a very minor word, people who are always pushing happiness as the key measure for successful existence. It's so ill-informed. that it's embarrassing that that even happens. Positive emotion makes people impulsive. Maniacs, for example, which is really, that's mania, right? Bipolar disorder. If you're manic, you're one happy person. Way too happy. Everything is great. Nothing but wonderful things that are beyond your imagination are going to happen to you, and they're going to happen fast. And so you're down to the mall to buy everything you can possibly get your hands on because you have 100 uses for everything. And then a week later, you crash into your depressive episode and you realize that you're $150,000 in debt and you've alienated everyone that you know. It's like, that's untrammeled positive emotion. So how about no? A pure index of positive emotion is no way of determining whether or not a system is working properly, even your own system. You need a balance between positive and negative emotions. Plus, positive emotions are absolutely exhausting, because if you're in a manic episode, it's like, it's time to get everything good right now. Fine, but you won't sleep for a week, and then you die because you just burned yourself to a crisp. And so to be overwhelmingly enthusiastic about everything sounds like a real blast, and I've seen full-blown manics and they're having plenty of fun, but it is not a pleasant thing to behold. They're just all over the place, and yeah, it's really not good. It's really not good. You need a balance between these two systems, because the whole world isn't explored territory bursting with nothing but promise. That's not the world. The world is that in a bounded space, a little bit, with an absolute horror show going out around the periphery. And both systems need to be active in order to keep you balanced. People do, unfortunately, sustain damage sometimes to the left prefrontal cortex, responsible for positive emotion, or the right prefrontal cortex, responsible for negative emotion. And if you sustain right hemisphere prefrontal damage, it makes you inappropriately happy and impulsive, and your life just goes, you just spiral downhill, because you make nothing but impulsive decisions. And you know what the real world consequence of that is. Get drunk and be impulsive for one night, you can learn what the bloody consequences of that are. You try living like that for a month, independently of IQ. That's the other thing that's so interesting. You can blow out your left prefrontal cortex and not suffer much of a decrease, especially in crystallized intelligence. But the fact that you're running on nothing but, your right hemisphere, you're running on nothing but positive emotion is going to auger you right into the ground. And then if you're perhaps even more unlucky and you lose the left prefrontal cortex, then you're permanently depressed, because there's nothing but the unexplored manifesting itself. We know that if you take depressed people and you do EEG analysis, that they have predominant resting right hemisphere EEG activation. And so that's roughly, so why is this? Well, unknown territory, known territory. You think, well, is that real? Well, it's real enough, so that's how your brain evolved. That seems pretty damn real.